Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where it's about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about episode 7 of Jupiter's Legacy. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, obviously, there's the whole plan of trying to get inside of the copy of Black Star's mind. But Walt's not going to be able to do it alone, because also it's super dangerous, because if they try to reanimate at least that fraction of his brain, and Walt gets trapped inside, he dies. So it's like, we're going to need Raiko's help, and like, she's like the next most powerful psychic next to you. Obviously, Sheldon's kind of reluctant against it because she's a contract killer. She's actually in the trailer, and I was wondering where she was going to fall into the story, and I also wasn't expecting. I was like, wow, you're good with blades and you're a psychic? Okay, that's interesting. So we see her, like, we kind of cut to like her sequence of like, you know, killing all those dudes, and obviously that poor lady, she got her arm cut off, but she's still fighting with one arm, and it's just like, yo, Raiko kind of makes mincemeat of them, and then Walt kind of stops her, and then we get the reveal, oh, that's Walt's daughter. I was like, that's interesting, because I actually had that conversation earlier thinking, like, Walt didn't have much of a life outside of this superhero thing. Maybe it still applies, but the fact is, him and his daughter definitely aren't on the best of terms, and the fact is that his daughter's a contract killer. I'm sure that doesn't sit well with Sheldon of like, oh, that's my niece. Nah, I'm sure he doesn't acknowledge her as part of the family just because of that contract killing side of things. But the question who her mom is, that's interesting. I mean, we still haven't tackled a lot of that stuff. Like, we don't know Petra's mom. We only see Fitz. We've met George's kid, you know, Hutch, but we don't know who his mom is. Like, he referenced his mom of like, oh, my mom says that you're the ones that turned against my dad, not the other way, not my dad turning against you. So we don't know. But I think that's all fascinating. But the point I was making is, I thought that this is kind of all he has. Apparently he has like a family. We don't know if like Raiko's like mom is still around or not, whatever those circumstances may be. Maybe this, like, the way that family operates, maybe that's what kind of pushed Raiko out to be like, maybe she's kind of on the outskirts, kind of like Chloe. Brandon to a certain extent, but more so like maybe there's some similarities in that, or maybe it's just like that's just the life she chose just because, oh, my dad's a hero. Like, you know, maybe it just made her like go, you know what, screw it, I'm gonna go to literally the extreme other side of things. I don't know. What really surprised me is when we see her without her mask on, and it turns out like Raiko is played by Anna Akana. I was like, what? I should have looked it up to confirm it, but looking, I was like, no, I'm pretty damn sure that's Anna Akana, which is sick, dude. I was like, yo, that's awesome. It's actually the second superhero property that at least I'm aware of that she's been in. The other one I'm thinking of, if you're unaware, is Ant-Man. Because she's in, I want to say it's the post-credit scene. It's that final sequence where, like, Luis is telling that story, like, someone told this to someone who told it to me, and so on and so forth. It's basically when Sam's looking for information on Scott. She's part of that sequence. And I was like, dude, but so, hearing this, dude, I was like, that's so awesome. Because I'm a fan of, like, what she does, so it's like, dude, it's, like, awesome to see her in it. So that was freaking sick. Because I didn't recognize that was her under the mask. It's not until she was in that scene without the mask. I was like, yo! So that's dope. But also I love that the fact that she doesn't, obviously showing you like what kind of relationship Raiko has with her dad. It's like, yeah, it's going to be $1 million a day plus expenses. It's like, yeah, it's like, cause she was like, oh, like, he's like, do me a favor. And she's like, oh, don't I do you like $1 million times a day or something? It's something of that nature. So it's like, I doubt this is a situation where this is like their first contact in a long time. Maybe not. But, this also leads to an interesting disagreement between Grace and Sheldon, where Sheldon's like, "Now we need to be united front. Like the Union hasn't been this divided, like at kind of at odds like this since like Skyfox, you know, George his betrayal in the '60s. So for him, it's like we need to be a united front. But for Grace, it's like, even though I disagree with you, and it's like she doesn't like." Her belief in the code is not as strong as it used to be. Like, for her, it's like, the code is broken. He's almost like, wait, what? For him, it's almost like, wait, what? Why are you saying that? And it kind of comes back to that full-fold conversation that Chloe brings up. Hell, even Walt brings this up in the past, so it also shows you, like, the past is kind of rearing its ugly head in many different regards, where, like, Walt made that remark in the past that, like, oh, like, you do whatever, like, people do whatever you want, treat you like the Messiah, and, like, you snap your fingers, you're the golden boy, and everyone has to follow your orders. Kind of borderline, because he's kind of enforces the code and, like, kind of makes people kind of submit to it, because it's like, nah, you have to follow the code. But for Grace, it's like, we're not living in the 30s anymore. The fact is, the world has changed and we have to change with it. And he's like, for him, it's like, so we're supposed to ignore the code that we built everything up for? It's like, no, the code is what you're holding on to. You're the one that's been holding on to it for so long. And you're just kind of crushing so many people under the weight of that code. It's like, these kids are out here, we're not really having their back and we're just so focused on the code and everything. It's like, these kids just want to be heard. Like, for once, Sheldon, listen to other people, because he's been so blocked off that he's not willing to listen. Just talk to them, hear them out, listen to them, hear what they want. That's what you need to do, Sheldon. Listen, like, and then he's just kind of like, and he walks over to her and says, like, you don't know what I want, and walks away. And it's like, but it's like, you're not listening to her either. It's like, who are you going to listen to? You won't listen to your daughter. You won't listen to your son. You won't listen to Grace. Like, no one can get through your head. He's just so... Well, it's an overcompensation, the code. Like I said, it's just an overcorrection to a certain extent. And he continues that overcorrection. And I just think that's so fascinating. We also have a conversation between Chloe and Brandon where it's like, after Jana, and it's like, Brandon's wondering if this is his fault. By killing Black Star, did he set all this in motion? Like, is this the consequence? Like, because the supervillains going as hard as they are, it's like, because now it's open season on the superheroes, because it's like, because the way they're making it sound like it wasn't this bad until Brandon killed Black Star, when things kind of really got set in motion. But, at the very least, like, there were still people getting killed, which is why they were like, wait, your code and everything, you're letting these villains live, and now they're coming out and they're killing all of us. It's like, there's that, but now it's like open season on superheroes. Like, they're dropping like flies because the villains are gunning for them. But it's like, did I set this precedent? Like, because I basically set the world on fire when I killed Black Star. There was already probably that resentment and stuff like that, but Brandon killing Black Star set a lot of this in motion. Once again, his dad's been stressing, like, you need to learn accountability, responsibility, realize there are consequences to his action, and he's watching it, like, as the world's kind of setting itself on fire because of what he did. Which I'm wondering, is that kind of supposed to be like a commentary on certain regards about, like, when shit kind of goes down? That's what the world kind of does. The world kind of has a tendency to set itself on fire when terrible shit goes down. It's not a one-for-one, but I'm wondering, like, there's parallels to certain aspects of life where it's like there's been some terrible stuff that's happened, and the world kind of revolting against it and burning it to the ground, burning the world to the ground as, like, just that built-up anger. And it's like, so it's like, the world, that 78% had already been feeling like this, and all it took was Brandon crossing that line to be like, yes, this is what we want, this is what we've been feeling. Like, it's a representation of all that resentment and anger they had built up, swelling to the top until it finally exploded. So here we are. And obviously Chloe's telling him, like, no matter what you do the right thing, people die. You do the wrong thing, some people die. But for Brandon, it's like, yeah, but you have to make a choice at the end of the day, because standing still is something he can't abide by. And, like, Chloe's like, oh, wow. It's like, I guess you are the next utopian, because I guess she kind of took it as a remark of, she is someone who chooses to kind of do nothing. She just kind of lets things happen, and it's just like, he doesn't want to be that. And, for him, it's like, you should be around more, like, even when mom and dad aren't here. So I'm curious, because for one, I brought this up last episode. This now marks the second scene that they've had together technically the third scene, because there's the opening sequences of them as kids, but that dinner scene is the only time they've been on screen together. Like, in the scene after that when he's talking to her outside, those are the only scenes they've been in together since. This is the only other one since since the first episode. So I thought that was interesting. But I'm wondering, is that kind of implying, like, she's popped in? This isn't her first time talking to Brandon subsequently since, and maybe she's popped in from time to time. She usually just waits until their mom and dad aren't around. But he's just like, you should be around when mom and dad are. And she's like, no. But then she's like, I'll think about it. Because I think during a time like this, after everything that's happened, the people they're losing, I think that's what kind of makes her be like, yeah, this is kind of a time where the family should kind of be together. But so there's that interesting element to it all. There's also the Petra conversation, because for her, she wants to talk to Brandon because she's like, I'm thinking of leaving the union, but he's like, you can't, especially considering what's going on right now. This is the time when, like, but for her, it's like, I don't believe in the code anymore. Also, I've never seen your mom, your dad, and your uncle this divided. And he was like, yeah, but that's when they need us the most to kind of hold them together, like, to be there, this is the moment, like, it's easy to fall apart. This is the moment we even more so need to come together. And, you know, Petra is like, you know, like I said, her doubts about it. And even Brandon's like, you know what, I won't lie and sit here and tell you, like, I haven't had my doubts about it, but I have. And she's like, well, what do you do about it? He's like, I think about what my dad said. Like, the code isn't here to make our lives easier. It's about caring for people, caring about the world. The fact is, kind of saying, like, what was it he was necessarily saying? I got part of it. I'm going to end up butchering the rest of the... but I'm going to try and paraphrase it. It was essentially kind of like what separates us from the rest of the world, that it's like the code... Like I said, I'm not remembering it. Like I said, I'm going to end up butchering it. But it was essentially like them doing the right thing. It's not going to... Like, it's... Yes, it's a... You know... There is an easy way out to this, but like we're not supposed to take it. We're supposed to kind of do things kind of the right way, and you know, for the sake of that, that's what this is all about. Like, you know, us doing this whole superhero thing. Once again, that's kind of what separates us from everyone else, is kind of having that standard and everything. So, like I said, I'm butchering it, but it was like really interesting, like Brandon's perspective, because he's been sitting on it, like. He, especially more recently, these past few days, has really shifted his mind on a lot of stuff, because I think legitimately Brandon has his questions about things, but I think he does regret killing Black Star because he's seen like the ramifications of what that's caused and what it's done. But the argument could be because your dad's instilled the code for this so long that people have had to live by it, that it's kind of built up this tension. It's been always building towards this. If it wasn't you, someone else would have basically like crack the dam on this situation, in a weird metaphor to make. Another angle to this is Walt going to visit Black Star, because he's like, oh, I'm going to go inside your copy's brain. I'm going to find out whether or not you're a part of this. Are you working with Skyfox? He's like, Skyfox. He's like, honestly, I kind of liked him a lot more than the rest of you, because it's like after he busted up one of my operations, we sat down and had drinks and stuff like that, because for him, it's like he never believed in that self-righteous BS that you guys believed in. Like, he's like, kind of calling Shelley out, saying like, oh yeah, Shelley is kind of like a hypocrite, you know, we'll expose Shelley for the fraud that he... And Walt's like, you see what happened there? I made you forget how to breathe. So the fact of the matter is, if I come back here, whatever information I don't get out of your copy, I'm gonna come back here and I'm gonna peel it out of you, you know, so just keep that in mind. And he's walking away and he's like, oh, like, you know, killing my copy did this, but like if you kill the real me, what do you imagine was going to happen? Like what the response is going to be? He's like, honestly, he's like, I don't give a shit. I'm not my fucking brother, like, because he doesn't have the same belief system as Sheldon. Never has, as we kind of showcased that with the past events. Some other interesting information came up too about the fact is Walt can't get inside of Sheldon's head, and I was like, I wonder why that is. That's interesting. He can probably read anyway. He can because that's the thing. He can definitely read Brandon's mind, but I don't know whether it's like he can only read, like, maybe it's like Sheldon's always on defense to make sure his mind can't be read, or maybe just a natural defense he has as his brother. But it seems like Brandon doesn't have the same luxury. But the stuff that comes up is usually like Sheldon's words resonating over and over again in his head. Either that's just straight up what Brandon's thinking, or maybe Walt can only get to the surface level. So maybe that's what's kind of leaking through, but maybe he can't fully get into Brandon's head. Like, I don't know. That was just such an interesting development of to be like, oh, that's fascinating. Obviously, Grace is a little more okay with Ryko being there. I even love that thing of like, no, you two stop having a secret conversation between yourselves. If you're going to say anything, say it in front of us and stuff like that. Also, she's such a like sarcastic smartass of like walking in and being like, oh yeah, like the beardo, man, going for like a Santa Claus look. Like she made some snide remark like that. But so basically, when they're able to finally do it, because Petra kind of juices her dad so that he can get like the parts of the copy of Black Star's like mind like working, so Walt can go inside. Him and Ryko do their thing, but going inside of it, it's like something's not right. So part of me wonders if it was a trap from the beginning. Like, you know, they're saying that George might be behind this. It might be that he thought so far ahead, knowing these guys so well, that eventually he knew that Walt would come to this conclusion, so he set a trap. It's like Walt got glimpses of something, and it kind of affects him. And obviously Ryko's trying to keep Black Star's mind open, because it's like, if I close it now, Walt's going to be stuck in there forever. So that's where we are there. In the past, we had the whole situation with them getting off the boat, ready to go to the island, and Richard has his reservations because of everything that he lost on that boat, and so he thinks, because Sheldon opens up to him and is like, yeah, the first thing I saw was my dad. It was after we buried my dad. It was at the hospital. And he's like, I've been seeing these visions and everything since. And I saw you. And he's like, I appreciate you pulling me out of the water. But honestly, I'm not going to the island, especially an island that popped out of nowhere. Because it's like, yeah, the visions are one thing. But like, this is, even I can't explain that. But I thought it was interesting what he kind of spoke to Richard about like, because Richard's like, kind of like, he's lost, you won't have no idea of what I've lost. And he's like, yeah, no, I have no idea. You're right. But tragedy, like loss, brings about, there's actually a tragic gift to loss, because with loss, what do you have left to lose? Because you have you have the opportunity to gain so much. It's like, that is a very depressing aspect. To even think that that's also a gift of loss is kind of interesting, which I think is kind of ironic, considering all that he does to try and prevent loss nowadays, and his trying to prevent loss ends up backfiring, because like so many lives are being lost regardless of everything. His desperation to protect so many people, in particular try and keep his family together and protect them, it's kind of coming up a little short now. Just an interesting thing to think about. But Richard does decide to get on a boat with them, so all 6 of them end up going. I thought the captain was going to go too. And I think that needs to speak volumes, but we'll circle back to it later. But they go on the island, and obviously it's like, well, where do we go from here? And it's like, well, we'll just have to keep going because Sheldon doesn't know. And so they're journeying forward, and every step of the journey, there's a little bit of tension that rises between the different, obviously there's a conversation between, the back and forth between George and Walt. Because like there's a whole thing about him being like, oh yeah, you're the golden boy, Sheldon, because it's just, saying like you were always dad's favorite and stuff like that. And obviously George is getting on, because it's a combination of George being self-defensive of not only himself but also Sheldon, because he kind of calls Walt out eventually at certain points, because it's like, oh, like you, because like it's like, oh, Walt calls him out for being like always work alone. He's like, really, Mister, I wanted to just leave the group already. Like you wanted to leave, and you were just about to leave until Grace kind of talked you down. So it's like, you talk about me wanting to work alone, and then talks about how Walt would kind of lock himself in a dark closet, sometimes even break down and cry to himself, kind of embarrassing Walt like that, which also plays a role in why he has a little bit of resentment towards Sheldon, because he feels like Sheldon cuts him down, kind of like George does. But I think it's also because George is feeling like, Walt, don't talk about me like you know me. Like he's like, because he's basically saying like, I've reached out to you. You want to make it seem like I've never made any attempts to make amends between us. I've tried time and time again. You're the one that just kind of spits in my face about it. Not literally, but it seems like that's what it's kind of coming up. Because like as they got deeper, and it's like, oh, there's a desert waiting for us. Well, screw that. And they're trying to leave, but every time they try to leave, like trees grow up in their face, and then all of a sudden it starts snowing. So the island is literally, which kind of makes you think of like Lost a little bit, but the island is alive enough to be like, no, you're not going anywhere. We're going to make these conditions so horrible that you can't go anywhere. But once again, I think it's fascinating that Grace continues to be the voice of reason. She did it on, the boat talking Sheldon down. She did it this time talking Walt down. And then later on she does it enough. Like she keeps being the one that's like, stop doing that. Stop. And she was even calling him out, being like, yo, stop like trying to cut Walt down. And then like, George was like, no, it's self-defense. But she did it time and time again. I think that speaks volume with her, because that ends up being something she talked about with Sheldon. I didn't talk about present day, where she was talking about, as someone, she used to kind of seek the truth. That was just kind of her job. And she says that somewhere along the way, she kind of lost that. But it's like, the truth should be the thing that matters first and foremost. And the truth is, you're not listening to anyone. So her kind of regaining, like, she had kind of lost that a little bit. I thought Chloe was being a little harsh saying that, like, oh, you don't have any opinions of your own. But I think for Grace, she's not as outspoken as she used to be. It's like, now it's kind of like, oh, it's like my words aren't really my words. They're kind of Sheldon's, aren't they? So it's like she's trying to find her place back to the truth because growing up, that was so important to her as, you know, for what she did for a living and everything. So like that truth mattered the most, and it still does. So it's time to just kind of listen to the truth. We've kind of spent so long kind of ignoring it. And maybe that's why we are where we are present day. But she was the one that kind of got Walt to calm down and say, like, listen to Sheldon. It's like, yeah, we got to follow him. So they're crossing the desert. And obviously it's a conversation about, you know, eventually it was like, why was Sheldon the one that was able to see his dad, but Walt wasn't? But it also comes to the conversation to everyone, like, who would you see if you could? In Fitz's case, it was his grandma. It's like she's the one that taught him to read. Kind of, you know, to learn to love. She gave nothing but love, even into a world and a country that didn't love her back. For Grace, it was her uncle who was in the war. He was a photographer, obviously having a big inspiration on her. For Richard, it was a friend of his, a fellow doctor that was on board the boat. He said a friend who would feel like we've been friends forever. I felt like he didn't say it, but I think he was kind of. It felt like it was kind of implying like there was more, like, especially given the time. Him, if there was something like that between them, he could never admit that given the time. But I was wondering, it seemed like it was more than just like a friendship. It seemed like they might have been lovers, but we don't know. Like, Richard didn't really get into it, but the way he kind of danced around it made it feel like that. And obviously for George, it's like his mother. Like, he wanted, you know, because to be fair, he lost his mom first. And then his dad died sometime after because his heart just kind of gave up after his mom died. Sadly, that you hear that. Like, that's kind of what happens sometimes when, like, a couple dies. Like, one partner goes and then, like, the other follows sometime after just because it's, like, they just want to be reunited. So, like, you know, when you've lost, like, that other side of your heart, it breaks it so that you just want to be reunited. So you just kind of give up a little bit. But for him, it was like, you know, he'd give anything just to spend more time with his mom. And they asked Walt. Walt's like, I don't look into the past, so no one. I wonder how true that. I don't think that is 100% true. But then they get through the desert, and I think that's the point too. When, like, the sandstorm is coming, and the point is they lock arms and they get through it together. I think that's the point. And then they go further in, and they end up, like, having to shimmy across some edges, and then, like, a lot of Walt's issues with his brother come to light. He calls him out because it's like, because, you know, for Sheldon, it's like, no, you were always his favorite, you got the good grades, he went to you with the business. It's like, no, he treated more like an employee rather than a son, but you got it all, like, everything kind of works out for you. You never had to really fight for scraps. You don't know what it's like to have to fight for anything because everything in your life was always handed to you. Which is, he's had his issues and his troubles, but it's like, that's only recently for him. And for Walt, it's like, you've only had to struggle recently with just all this other stuff. But the fact of the matter is, everything else in life kind of came easy to you. Because I think there's also a level of Walt that's probably like, you got chosen for this. It's like, after everything I've worked for and sacrificed, like, why wouldn't Dad come to me? I think on some level there's that aspect of the resentment, but it's also like, you're the reason why Dad killed himself. Because I told you not to expand, and what you did, you didn't listen to me. You never listened to anybody. You didn't listen to me, and because of that, Dad's dead. The fact that, what did you do? You ridiculed me, and you cut me down, you know? And it's just like, you know, Sheldon wants to be there for his brother, and he's just like, go, just move on. And they're just, you know, ultimately he almost falls, but luckily they were to help him. But as they trudge along and we kind of zoom out of kind of like the almost maze-like thing they're in, we see all the symbols that Sheldon was kind of drawing, that they're kind of stuck in a giant maze in the shape of that. But then they come across this wall, and then we see, like, there's all these different people, like Vikings and everything. So it's like people from different cultures and centuries, well, civilizations and centuries that are all dead now. It's like they were all brought to the island, and it's like, right, they were all chosen as well. But then, like, obviously the wall's blocked off. It's like, well, where do we go? And then, like, the wall starts rising, and it's like they're stuck there. Richard starts charging at Sheldon because he blames him. Sheldon's like, no, this is a test. It has to be another test. And then, like, George and Walt are fighting over the gun, and it's like, well, like, everything's going bad. But then Grace looks and sees the nearby bodies, and is like, no, stop, everyone. Look at them. They killed each other. She's like, what have we been doing ever since we got off this goddamn boat? We've been fighting. That's what this is about. Because look at all these different groups. There were 6 people each. that's what this has all been about. 6 people that were chosen, and the island is testing them. If we can get through this together, or will we turn against each other? That's kind of the whole point. Because remember, Chester inside of his head was like, oh, go ahead and kill them. But everyone failed the test. Even, the farmer, because he ended up killing his family. It's just like crossing that line of working together instead of working separately. So when the time comes, Sheldon and everyone kind of touches the wall, and it's like, yeah, it lights up. But when it gets to Walt, it doesn't. And then, like, George just deactivates. And it's like, okay, you guys got to put your issues aside. But it's not just George and Walt. It's also George and Sheldon. And it's like, yeah, that's the thing. They put their issues aside and work together, but they never dealt with it. That's my problem. It's like, and I think that's where we are right now. It's like, you never dealt with your issues. Despite the, like, decades you've been alive, like, you never dealt with everything. So ultimately, it seems like, and now I think we're finally getting the understanding of where the Jupiter aspect of this comes into place, because it looks like they got teleported to what seemed like it might have been a different planet. Well, so I was like, oh, is this where, so they're literally on Jupiter, and there's a power there, and it manifests itself. At first, like, he was like, dude, I'm going crazy, leave me alone, Dad, is what Sheldon says, but Walt's like, no, I see him too. And then the moment that happened, and we see the look on everyone's faces, I'm like, everyone's seeing the person they wanted to see the most. And, Walt and Sheldon both see their dad, and, Grace sees her uncle, Fitz sees his grandmother, Richard sees a guy that he cared about, George sees his mom. But the whole conversation is about what they've been through, the suffering they went through, they've proven themselves. And I think that, once again, I think this thing picks people who have suffered the most in their own regards in many different facets. And when you look at everyone, each of the groups kind of had their own, like, because that's why I think it chose, the Farmer Miller, and I think that's why it chose Sheldon. Why him specifically? Why? I guess because he was suffering in his own way, especially with the reveal about his dad. So, like, he ended up kind of being I think it probably always starts with one person. It never reaches out to 6 people. It chooses 6 in general, but it starts with picking one particular person and then that person kind of fills out the rest of the ranks. It was a test to see if they could come together, and they succeeded. And obviously, like, the explosion from the island, it looks like the island disappears. I wonder if the island's still out there. Could other people go there, or, like, now that they've been chosen, it set everything in motion. Because what I thought was interesting is that light came from the island, and it seemed like I didn't notice it with the others. I definitely noticed it with the captain, where it was like the markings kind of popped on his, like, they kind of glowed on his body for a second and then disappeared. So I was like, oh, so could this have basically set forth superpowers in this universe, and that the moment them going to the island set that in motion, or not? What we see at the end, though, is them kind of lowering themselves down from the sky, and we're like, okay, so the suits came with the superpowers. Okay, that's not just like yeah, you got the suit. That's interesting. I mean, it's very like Shazam-like, because it's like, oh, Shazam has the suit because of, so I thought that was kind of interesting. I thought those were suits that they made themselves, but it's like, no, it came with their powers and everything. So interesting developments. I'm really curious to ultimately see where all this takes us. The next episode obviously being the season finale, so I'm curious where the season finale takes us with all of this, how it ends up wrapping up this season. I've been saying season, but like Netflix says it as a volume. To be fair, it's kind of like how they do with like Sabrina, Chilling Adventures of Sabrina. Rather than being seasons, they're parts, that whole thing. But regardless, I'm really interested to see where the season finale takes us with all of this. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.